Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're here today. I have a special guest for us. His name is Todd Kashdan, and he is a doctor of psychology, and he's a scientist, a dad. He is in charge of the well-being lab, and he is also a college professor, and he has a goal to improve lives. So today he's going to be with us to talk about improving our lives as parents and helping our kids find happiness. And also, what does that mean exactly? He's going to help us define. With that, let's get to Todd.
So happy to be here.
Yes. Okay. So we're going to be talking about how to raise healthy kids. This is like our goal as a parent is to have a happy kid. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yes.
I feel the same way.
Yes. Okay. So what do you think are the keys to happiness?
Well, if we're thinking about kids, so youth up to age 18, one of the most important parts of this is reducing the impact of social comparison in your lives. And every single technological device over the past 20 years has made that more difficult. And part of our job as parents is to set the tone with ourselves as models, which is really being comfortable with who we are, flaws, warts, problems, failings, missteps, embarrassment, awkward moments, such that we are reminding our kids on a regular basis that being perfect and looking as if you have no scars or beauty marks on your body is not what it means to be a beautiful, wonderful, virtuous, great character of a person. It's really the unsanded edges of your personality that's going to draw people to you, not the sanded edges.
Yeah, I love that idea of like, we don't have to be so refined. We're working through this.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, that's one dimension. Another dimension that's really important is that we have to understand that we have some cognitive processes in our brain that make it hard to be happy because we're not designed to be happy. We're designed basically to procreate and live another day. And so one of those mechanisms that evolution provided for us for good and for worse is that events and rewards and punishments that happen to us tend to be temporary, but we tend to believe that they're going to have a lasting influence, a scarring influence, or this profound influence in our lives. So we adapt very quickly to events, and we have to understand this concept to realize how we can make better decisions about what vacation we pursue, what friends are best for us in terms of what we actually desire, not what the world would think we desire. And even the idea of when was the last time you ever went on social media and walked away from that and saying, that was an amazing use of my 35 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Can you give an example of like what the process might look like in our brains that you're talking about in this example? Like what might we be thinking, or how does that work?
Yeah, let's use the new puppy example. So, there's the adoption happening at your local PetSmart, like myself and my family, and you see this beautiful puppy. It licks you. It's cute. You can't wait to hug it. Just if it's your first puppy, it's like just like that texture, everything about it, raising it, seeing its personality. And if you were able to forecast what's going to happen 2 months later, and I'm sure many of the people listening already know this, is those first days when the kids say, oh my God, I'm going to walk the puppy every single day and I'm going to feed it and I'm going to make sure it doesn't pee in the house. Even if it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, I'll just stroll around the block that happens there. And those first 2 weeks, they're incredible. Like your kids are conscientious, gritty, like diligent little characters. And then after 2 months, you're doing everything that happens there. So this is basically a mental forecasting error, which is we get really caught in the present moment thinking that this first few days and weeks of having a new pet is going to basically extend itself for the next 12 years. And in reality, there's going to be most likely a major shift after you realize that the burden to joy ratio is nowhere near what you originally thought it was. And the same things happens in romantic relationships and jobs and lots of other life domains.
Are we able to forecast better? Like how are we able to do this process of maybe finding reality in this, or like what is more likely to happen than what we positively perceive or negatively perceive? Because sometimes it's negative, right? Like I know sometimes my kids, I'll be upset with something that happened, and then they're like, you're always going to be mad at me. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to always be mad at you. Just like in this one situation, I'm upset with you hitting your sister, right? Or whatever it is.
Yeah. Right. And Bryce, you just captured the positive part of the system, which is it's again, an evolutionary design, which is if something bad happens to you that doesn't kill you, poison you, or give you disability, the idea is you're supposed to bounce back quickly so you can get some calories into your body, survive another day, secure a mate, maintain a mate, take care of your offspring so they survive. So you're supposed to bounce back very quickly. Now, you really hit one of the kind of key elements of how do you break free from this cognitive machinery. And that is first, understand that it exists. Second, keep on having a touchstone of a positive experience and a negative experience for you and for your children, or if it's not your children, any child, to remind them, remember when you got that cut when you fell off your bike and it was that big slice and you thought you were going to go to the hospital and you thought we're going to have to amputate your leg. How long did that last? That pain. How long did it take before you went back on your bike? How long did you not just go on your bike, but you actually said you want to go on like an off-roads mountain bike course that happened there? And so you need having these touchstone moments, because we really respond to stories, is a great way, as opposed to having a little Todd on your shoulder which says, hey, we have a problem with mental forecasting errors and cognitive adaptation, and we've talked about this before. So have a positive story and have a negative story, and it's also a nice way of just having this nostalgic play within your social or family unit, as well as that you're constantly talking about some of the coolest things that have happened to you, and some of the bad events are really fun. Like when you have like a really awkward moment and you try to explain what you want for dinner and you end up describing what you made for dinner yesterday, and your brain just completely like goes into a different direction from the situation that you're in. Horrible in the moment. A sense of shame, embarrassment, and guilt. But afterwards, you look back on it and be like, that was absolutely absurd. My brain is just sometimes my worst adversary.
Yeah. I mean, it can be our worst enemy, like when we're thinking about things that are holding us back, right? To not try something new. Or a lot of times in my practice, I'll have, especially with the teenagers, like a situation that happens socially that is not desirable. And maybe a friendship has ended or relationships ended, or just something embarrassing happens, and they'll be like, no one will ever forget this happened. Like it's going to be my story forever. But 99% of the time, something else happens, and then everybody's focusing on that instead of whatever it was that happened with you and dating somebody else, and there's some other thing to focus on. Is that how our brain's supposed to work?
Yeah. So I love that story because on average, self-consciousness peaks at about 15 and a half years of age. And I think it's really important as adults to try to remember what it's like to be them and not take your adult mind and think that you've got the perspective of the 15-year-old or 16-year-old or 12-year-old. And so one of the things that you want to be doing is say like, yeah, like it feels as if this is going to be like a major motion picture that's going to be like, the big summer blockbuster, and it's all anyone's ever going to be talking about. I get that. And yet not dismissing any of that. I just want to reflect back on what happened the last time something like this like occurred. And again, having these touchstone moments where you had a negative thing happened, and then it becomes the new gossip and the new juice, the new tea, whatever the term is that pops out in there. And so I think it's really important to remind people through story that these narratives are very dynamic. They're constantly changing. They're fluid, and your identity is very fluid as well. And so you may be defined as being the class clown when you're in elementary school, and when you get to high school, you may be defined as being like, the great lacrosse player. And the thing is, you have no idea what's going to be central to your identity in terms of intrinsically, this is who I am. And you're also not going to be very sure of how the world is going to view you as an individual in terms of what they give centrality to.
How do you help kids with that perspective of like, we're evolving, so we can use like stories, right? Of like, you used to like this, now you like this, and that changes. But how do we as parents, because sometimes I think we forget that that happens too, because sometimes things happen to our kids and we're concerned about those and we forget this perspective too. So what can we do as parents to kind of help promote the positivity or happiness with our kids and that part?
Yeah, so I would say this doesn't even fall under the category of happiness. Let's put this under self-coherence. Is that like this?
Define that?
Yeah, just like this, like very clear understanding of the self in your current time and place.
Perfect. Okay.
Right. And that's really a beautiful thing. And I think one thing that parents really enjoy is describing their kid. God, when someone asks, what's your kid like? Like, what's their personality? Like, people gush over this question. By the way, this is just like a tip for social interactions around other parents. Versus like, what did your kid do? Like, what are they like? If I hung out with them for like 2 hours, like, what would they be like? So I think one of the things that's really important is being able yourself to describe your kid in a very multifaceted way. So if you ask me, so I have 17-year-old twins, and most people who get exposed to twins think, oh, are you exactly alike? Now I happen to be a twin as well. So I went through this so I can help my twins differentiate them. So one thing that I've always done, being a twin myself, is very clearly define how they're different with their strength profile, really focusing on their strengths, because one of the things that all siblings like to do is they like to put the flag into, as a conquistador and say, I'm the attractive one, I'm the intelligent one, I'm the funny one. And families reinforce that. So part of our job is also to protect our kids from their own family and saying, well, no, how freaking funny was Chloe when she said that? Like, and you think she's not the funny one? Or if Raven's not the intelligent one, wait, did you see like how much she killed advanced placement science? Like, you can't get higher than what she got. And so you're constantly preventing black and white narratives that they then will actually use to define who they are. You're always making it very it's like a very multifaceted palette of who they are. And the more that you do this, the more that you're going to be able to refer back to, hey, remember when math was really hard for you and you were in love with science, and now you basically got really into, computer technology and 3D art, and all of a sudden, you're not really interested in psychology or sociology or physics and chemistry. When you're doing that, you're not labeling them. You are just basically restating exactly what you're seeing and observing and what they're saying themselves. Yeah. And I want to make sure I underline that. You don't want to be labeling them. You want to be restating what you're seeing and what they're saying.
I love that, to not be quite in a box, because I think we're all so multifaceted, right? Like, we can, as a girl, it would be like all the girls are dressing up, but sometimes I didn't want to do that. And I wanted to climb trees and, play soccer with the boys and whatever. Right. And so then it was everybody's maybe trying to label you for understanding purposes, but we're all so much more dynamic than that.
Yeah. And for me, if there are dads listening, one thing that I'm very cautious of, because I have 3 daughters and that's it. And so I'm very careful to make sure they are not defined by their physical attractiveness or their bodies, really, because society does way too much of that for girls as it is. And so part of my job as a father is basically to flesh out the other elements of their identity. And it doesn't matter if they're working out with me. It doesn't matter if they're focused on dieting. It doesn't matter if they're changing dramatically in good ways or not. The thing is, there's enough of that culturally. And so my job is to actually be very carefully at delineating and searching for what are the other characteristics that they're not defining. So I'm looking for virtues. I'm looking for what's your level of forgiveness? What's your level of kindness? What's your level of compassion? What's your level of appreciation and concern about justice, curiosity, creativity, flexibility, playfulness? Like there's so many dimensions that society doesn't reward you for. And one of the things we can do as parents is think about what are the things that I appreciate about my kid? What are the things about my kid that are actually quite valuable in society that they're not being rewarded for by their teachers, their peers?
Yeah, that's a great mindset to have, because I think then we forget about those things and then we don't focus on them, or we don't recognize them in ourselves even sometimes.
Yeah, like wisdom. Right. So one of the things my well-being laboratory has been interested in is like wisdom, like virtue prodigies, where they develop these strengths before supposedly developmentally they're supposed to have them.
Mm-hmm.
And so wisdom is one of my favorite ones, is the ability to appreciate uncertainty and figure out a decision in a very ambiguous environment. And sometimes kids show these very wise moments. They tend not to be very high in wisdom per se, like generally, but they have wise moments. And one of the things you want to do is when you observe psychological strengths in action is to call them out.
Mm-hmm.
It's the opposite of like a teacher screaming and like slamming their ruler against the table when they see someone act out like negatively.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I see wisdom, I'm like, oh my God, like your response is better than like an 85-year-old man who's lived like 3 lifetimes. Like that was such a good response to recognizing that our server at the restaurant seemed to be like depressed or out of the loop. And then you asked like, hey, are you okay? And like, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. That was so cool that you did that.
Yes.
And if I refer that to my 9-year-old, just imagine what's happening in her brain as she's hearing that you have the wisdom of like an 85-year-old. And I wish I was you in terms of what I did in that moment. So we can think about the building blocks of creating a fulfilling life for your child are nothing more than multiple moments that you're connecting together. And so you're intentionally searching daily for moments where you can capitalize on their greatness or their potential for greatness.
Yeah. I love how you redefined it instead of focusing on happiness, because I think we often are so focused on that emotion, but just about making it about connection and a meaningful life. What I think connection is key. That's maybe what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, just think about the last social situation you were with adults where you kind of weren't comfortable in your skin. And it probably wasn't too long ago where you jumped to your phone, you pulled it out, you try to look busy, you're moving from, your left foot to your right foot. You don't have that nice balance. Your posture isn't great because you don't feel that confident. You feel as if no one's appreciating your humor and your stories is just not clicking. I refer to this as like having your B game or your C game when you're socialized, and it happens.
Yes.
And so if you think about that, the idea is, can we create more situations where people can bring their A game? And part of that is like, physically putting your arm around someone, being like, oh my God, you know what? You should tell them that story that like you told me that like cracked me up on the way here. So there's that element of like leveraging their A game. But the other part of this is helping them be comfortable having the awkwardness of the B game or the C game. And that's the idea of like, hey, like, it sounds like you're a little bit off tonight, but guess what? I love you. Like, I just want to be with you. I just want to be near you. You don't have to entertain me. You don't have to be stimulating to me. You don't have to be smiling, especially to girls and women, like telling them like, hey, why are you unhappy? Why aren't you smiling? Like every woman knows that they've been exposed as if like your emotions must match the social desirability of people that are near you as opposed to what intrinsically you're experiencing. So you're avoiding that and you're saying of like, I enjoy this social event because you're here. You don't have to do anything. I got you. Mm-hmm. And that's like what Bryce, what you're talking about in terms of the belonging part. I really like to take it behavioral. so you can
Yeah.
feel it and see it, as opposed, because sometimes I think when we talk about diversity, inclusion, belonging, they're just these like loaded words, as opposed to what would it look like if you enacted these values and tried
Mhm.
to create an environment that allowed for belonging. Like, what would you be doing
Mhm.
differently? That's why I try to create this visual picture of it.
Yes. No, that's beautiful because I think that simulates more thought, right? And action and that of like, what would this feel like to be like that? Or what would you be doing differently to create belonging? That's a lovely thought. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I mean, what do you think gets in the way of that connection, I guess? So I was going to ask you about what gets in the way of happiness, but I like to shift to this idea of like really focusing on connection. So what do you think gets in the way of connection?
Well, I mean, a big thing which the Scandinavians are the best at in the world is we have such high expectations. And part of that is from the media that we consume, where
Mhm.
all awkward interactions end up in any stream movie or any book that you see. They tend to lead to something very smooth and beautiful. And there's a sense of ease. And in the
Mhm.
real world, it's like staccato. So it's like a DJ who just doesn't have the quite groove with their hand as they're kind of moving from song to song, trying to kind of entertain and kind of liven the crowd.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
so with this, I think it's like really an appreciation and tolerance of pain, distress, and negativity. It's kind of been for 20 years that I've been studying well-being. The most common response that I give when a journalist asks me, what do you think is the most important thing for happiness or well-being or flourishing, choose your or thriving
Mhm.
or positivity? And I've given the same answer for 20 years, which is that
Yeah.
a better ability to tolerate pain. And there's physical pain, but really our brain reacts, the same exact regions of the brain are reactive when we feel as if we're being negatively evaluated or judged than when we smash our hand with a hammer because we missed the nail.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay. I have so many thoughts. I'm like, I don't know where to go with this because I'm like so intrigued by this.
I'll tell you a really
Yeah.
cool study if you
Yeah.
want to get some
Yeah.
interesting science. I think your listeners might as well, which is a friend of mine in Kentucky did some research of so it's the I'm not even describing the brain region. It's just going to try to make me sound smart. So we know that if you take acetaminophen or Tylenol or ibuprofen, that it's going to basically temporarily reduce your physical pain. So if
Mhm.
you wake up with a neck crank or lower back problems, L3, L4, L5, if you're over 40 listening, you know what it's like.
Yes.
And so what he wanted to know was if someone experiences rejection on a given day, is taking ibuprofen or acetaminophen have the same effects? And the answer is yes. You actually see like a 10% to 15% reduction in social pain in the aftermath.
Mm.
Now, you don't want to be taking this on a regular basis. To me, it's just a nice way of validating is you can't see it, but it's just as real as your calf popping playing pickleball in terms
Yeah.
of you feeling as if you're ostracized activates those brain regions. You feel the sense of inflammation. You get tired more quickly. Cognitively, you're not as quick and extemporaneous and witty. No, know this, that when you feel not it doesn't matter reality. If you believe that you're being ostracized and rejected, that sense of lethargy, meaninglessness, less intellectual thought, it's real. And your kids experiences this as well, which means that don't be the 1970s dad that says, suck it up when a kid comes home and says, I was bullied today. And
Mhm.
don't fall into the trap. I love the book, Coddling of the American Mind. I love the idea that we're too, I'm one of them, like too involved as snowplow parents and, helicopter parents. Here's where they push it too far. If your kid believes that they were mistreated in whatever way, your job is to be the human acetaminophen. Like
Mhm.
your job is to be soothing, not because you want to take away their pain, because you understand that they're experiencing pain and you sit with it. To sit
Mhm.
with someone else with pain, that is at the core what compassion is. And I think we skip over it too quickly to try to solve the problem as opposed to just being there with someone, a young person or an adult who has
Mhm.
a problem.
Yeah. It's uncomfortable for us, I think, as parents to see our kids experiencing something that's uncomfortable for them. So then we want to solve it really quickly to make it go away. But that's also like where the learning happens, right? Our kids are actually amazing at coming up with solutions. And I find that even with my own kids of like, we have a problem and I don't solve it, but empathize and just like sit with that feeling that they're having of whatever the friend problem is or the school problem or whatever. And they come up with really good solutions. I'm always impressed with the creativity that they have or like the insight to solving the problem.
Yeah, I'm curious is because I know everybody would love to hear it. Like, what's one of those creative solutions that pops into mind?
Well, so I was thinking about so my one of my daughters, I have four kids, two girls, two boys, and one of my daughters was having an issue at recess where it was like a friend was playing with other people and she felt kind of left out. And I was like, wow, I can understand, how that felt for you to like have your friend playing with somebody else and you really wanted to play with her. And I was like, that's hard. And we just kind of like sat there and she was like, I think I could actually play tag too. And I was like, yeah, what do you think about that? And she was like, I mean, tag's not my favorite. I don't really like it that much, but I really like my friends. And so I'm going to try playing tag. And I was like, okay, cool. And she went and she tried it and she came back and I was like, how did today go? What was that like for you? And did you end up playing tag at recess? And she was like, I did. And I actually had fun. And I was like, cool. Are you going to play tomorrow? And she was like, maybe. I really like the swings. I mean, it's just, so it was like she came up with a solution. I didn't even make a suggestion. Or one of my kids has also had trouble, like trouble with a teacher, and his solution to navigating through the problem with the teacher was like, hey, the teacher's doing this thing that I don't really like. And I was like, what do you want to do about that? Is there something you want to do about that? And he was like, well, are you going to send an email? And I was like, I mean, that's one idea. And I just didn't say anything because I'm not opposed to helping support, but I wanted to hear. And he was like, well, if you did send an email, I think I would want you to say that, this is what's bothering me. And I'd really like to find a way to not have to do that part or for that thing to not happen. And I was like, okay. I was like, what if you sent the email and you just copied me on it? Would that be an idea? And he was like, oh, like an adult? And I was like, yeah, like an adult. And he was like, how about I write the email and you send it from your email? And I was like, cool. Yeah, we can do that.
Oh my
So
God, I'm so glad I asked this question.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, we have had some cool stuff. Have your kids done anything that's like super impressive to you where they've solved a problem that you're like, I wouldn't have thought of that?
Oh yeah. I mean, what I love about what you just described is these are all the solutions are very mundane, but we're all overwhelmed. Like
Yeah.
my friend Bridget talks of it as time confetti, where it's just like there's all these little strips and we just can't put it together, and it feels like there's so many things going on. So we forget that there's no really complicated solution. It's just like you hear Bryce, I'm listening to you talk, and I'm like, oh, this is great. Just like the sitting and the waiting with a very nice open-ended question. And it's like a beautiful moment with your kids because they're training themselves, but you're providing the secure scaffolding for them to just sit in there and know that you're safe. You can say whatever the hell you want, and I'm going to work with whatever material you give me. Like, you don't have to give me the golden juice, but
Mm-hmm.
I am going to bend and twist and tweak whatever you say to kind of help contort it into something really useful. One of my 17-year-olds, she had a really good moment when she was in fifth grade, where they were told that the after school programs could not pressure the kids to join those clubs. Supposed to be like, pressure free environment. So there was one class where the band teacher came in and then she was like, hey, so you guys are all signing up for next year for sixth grade band. And she took everyone out of the class, explained all the benefits of sticking with band. And then my daughter, which I was so proud of her, she basically said, hey, like raised her hand. Like, I thought you're not supposed to pressure us to join a club because they make money based on their job security, depends on how many people sign up. Now, this teacher screamed at my daughter brought her to the principal's office, said she was like, like this is like inappropriate. It was disrespectful. She had the floor, and I got a call from the principal, and I was like, okay, I'm like, this is a she said story, so I don't know what it is. And I came in and I basically told the principal, I said, I don't know what my daughter said, but she's in 5th grade. So whatever she said, she's attempting to be assertive, which is, hopefully that's what you're trying to have every kid do, which is to get the best possible outcome in a difficult situation. And in that moment, you have a choice of punishing the kid or saying, I like what you were saying. I didn't like the way you said it. If you said it this way, it would have been more persuasive when it happened there. And I gave this pretty provocative example. I said, because they were saying that this teacher wanted to punish my daughter, detention or something to that effect. And I said, imagine this. You punish my daughter. She goes to high school. Some guys are sitting behind her in class. They're snapping her bra. They're like teasing her, poking her in the arm with their finger. And she's saying, get off me. And they're like, no, like I'm going to keep doing it. It happens there. You're training my daughter right now to be this very passive, non-assertive creature who's just going to take it. So that's the future trajectory of your going. And I'm suggesting there's a better way, which is have the teacher say, I'm sorry I overreacted. You're only a kid. Here is the path of how you could describe that. And I would have said, you were absolutely right. That happens there. And then somehow the principal listened to me. But it was like a combination of the two of us where you could argue that I was being like a helicopter parent. I would argue it is that I saw a hole in the way that we're not really teaching kids to be psychologically minded. And the punishment was disproportional to a young kid trying to realize that an authority figure was basically being a little bit too controlling for what the situation was. And I want all these little rebellious kids to experiment with it. And I want all adult figures to say, I like what you're going with. You don't quite have it right yet. What if you did it? Imagine if you did it this way. And to me, that gets closer to like an optimal society.
Oh, totally. I love this idea because this really supports the idea that I'm working from in my own life as a parent is like collaborative parenting of like, it's my job to solve all the problems but it is my job to hear what is going on, to like understand the situation to the best that my kid can explain it or, somebody else, and then get curious about what do we do from here? Like, how do we go forward? And I think our society struggles with this a lot especially in the school systems. I'm glad that you brought up that example though, because it's like, I love teachers. I mean, we need them. They're so important and they have such a valuable role. But a lot of times I think there's like punishment of like removing recess from a kid who can't sit still or didn't turn their work in. And I'm like, I don't think that's the solution, right? Like, I know that's not the solution and it just punishes you for them to not get out and get that movement out because obviously they're needing that. Yeah. I don't know. So it's this part of like, helping to see like, okay, I get what you're saying, like homework is important or turning our work is important. Love that. How do we do that in this situation? Like, how do we help Timmy get his homework turned in? It's obviously not saying in from recess because that didn't work very well, or that, is sabotage to yourself. What do you think about that idea of like, how can we use this in an educational setting?
Yeah, I'm a teacher fanatic as you. So I'm all about if there was a ballot on every vote, every year where we vote, I would care much less about candidates and just like raise teacher salaries, like give them more training, like every single time I check that box. So there's a great research by Jeffrey Cohen at Stanford University and he's focusing mostly on minority kids. You can define that any way you want to. It's just like basically is whatever subgroup tends to be less representative in the district you're in. So it's not just race, sex, sexual orientation. It's also if it's a very religious area and someone's an atheist, you're the minority, and vice versa. Atheist area, religious person, you're the minority. Yeah. So I think we have to think broad about this, especially with kids, because we really have to think of what's it like to be the minority of one in a group. Even as an adult, that's hard. As a kid, it's just excruciating in terms of the social dynamics. So what he did was he wanted to do like this experiment where what if you gave people that were failing as a minority in a classroom environment feedback, and some of the feedback was just like, hey, listen, you could do better. So just kind of like general globular thumbs up or thumbs down. And the other experimental condition was you said, I've seen you in class. I've heard you speak. I know how good you are at understanding literature and be able to articulate your thoughts. You could be amazing in terms of your writing. And this is not the you that I know that I've seen on a regular basis. And when you give minority kids that kind of feedback, really any kid that kind of feedback, it is amazing how their performance changes. Now, how can you describe that feedback that is described? You were acknowledging that you see them for the potential that's there and they're not delivering it. But it's not like a cliche Miss Universe kind of, if Miss Universe pageants even still exist, they shouldn't. Like we're like this general statement, like, you're a good kid, you could do better. That's like what a grandparent from the 50s would say. This is very specific in terms of, I've seen you, I've heard, I do this all the time with college students where they're failing in my class and I just take them after class. I stop them and I say, Jake, listen, when I ask a question in class, your comments, they're complicated, they're sophisticated. You bring in like popular literature. You bring in like something I said like 3 classrooms before. You see threads between classes. Something is not having that translate on the page because that's your brain, because I'm seeing it live and it tells me like, there's something obstructing you. Tell me whatever that is, that barrier, I'm going to help remove that. And those students, they tell me like 10 years later, they remember these conversations. And so I think if you want to think about one of the rewards of being a parent, being a teacher, is these kind of bits of feedback not only make them perform better, but you are having like an indelible mark in a positive way on their sense of character. And that's really what we're trying to do with every young person we're mentoring, guiding, or raising in our lives.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I think to translate this advice that you have to like parenting, if we see our kids struggling with something like maybe they were doing really well in their math class, but now they're not, how would you handle that situation? Like what advice in terms of like motivating them or talking them through that would you give to parents to help them help their kid?
Yeah, I have a neighbor on my block who will despise me for mentioning this on this podcast, who had a very social kid, super bright, like vastly more intelligent than I was at her age and almost everyone I know, and then got crushed by COVID, and now is basically in a school refusal situation, doesn't want to go to school, just feels that they're not up to par with the other students. And the advice that I've given them is, you have to actually refer back to the specific time points where she was exceeding everyone else. Like that's her. Like that is her. She's the one in the 95th percentile on this exam that's objective that she performed. And she basically was able to had such an easy time in mathematics that she's doing algebra 3 years before she's supposed to be doing this. And the other part of this, so one part is, again, acknowledging past successes that were based on effort, not just by like, she won the genetic lottery. She put effort in. The second part is reducing the pressure of saying, you don't have to take algebra 3 years ahead of its time. You don't have to be in the 95th percentile. I'm going to love you no matter what. And what I see is that some of this is stressing you out. And so what if you took your foot off the gas a little bit? And what else do you want to have added to your life is lighting you up, is giving you energy, is like exciting for you? Because I'd rather you do less of the book work and have this really kind of like balanced, complicated life that has all the other things that you're having in there. You tell me whatever the other thing is, or things you want to add in, and take a little bit less time on your homework when you come home. I will facilitate that. You want a course, you want to do things, you want to go places. This is why I make money. I make money so that we can make things happen.
I love that, to reduce the pressure and to remind them of where they've been and then let them decide how they go forward.
Yeah, like you have the ability, you have the skill, and yet there is no need to seek out Harvard or Yale or
Sure.
Princeton, because you're going to be fine if you end up at, James Madison University or, SUNY Oneonta. Like, there are people that succeed with amazing lives, happy, meaning, purpose, like richness at every single college and every single trade school, and just skipping from high school into work in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that idea because I do think we have a lot of expectations for our kids and they then have a lot of expectations for themselves and there's a lot of pressure. And so sometimes that can be paralyzing for sure. So what do you think? What are the things that you have learned in your parenting journey that have been the most transformative for you?
I mean, as a guy with three daughters, I mean, it's just endless. I mean, I think one of the things for me is, and it's also like it's why I study what I study, is the real importance of your emotional life. Is that every single emotion has this real purpose that comes there, and this includes my own. Like, if I get irritated, I have to figure out, is it they're reminding me of the things I dislike about myself? That is, am I projecting my problems onto my kids? Is it that I have a low tolerance for uncertainty and distress? Again, I'm taking it out on my kids. And if they're feeling sad or uncomfortable, or, one of my kids is a lot quieter and more introverted than me and doesn't like to socialize as much. I'm like a social butterfly. And so they are my teacher. They're my Buddha. Like, they just remind me of, some kids like just don't want to hang out with their friends for multiple hours per day. And for me, that's like such an anomaly. It was hard to understand. And now sort of I'm coming to appreciate a greater appreciation of individual differences. I think we genetically create these little characters, and then we no longer have ownership of them. The idea of like, you own your kids, you're responsible for your kids, but you don't own your kids. You just have this garden and you don't know if ivy's going to grow all over the walls. You don't know if it's going to have thorns. You don't know if it's going to have beautiful, like, violet leaves and colors and shades. You have no freaking clue. And so the idea for me, is being very attentive to phases and stages of how my kids change. And I really try to adopt my parenting, kind of like follow the leader. Like, I'm following them in terms of, okay, seems like you need this. And I regularly do check-ins, just like as if it was like a semi-annual like job evaluation, which is like,
Yeah.
hey, I've been trying to do this. Tell me how I'm failing. And so I give them the out. I don't say how I'm doing well. I say, tell me where I'm failing. And then what am I not doing that you'd like to see more of? And they feel so empowered. They have such agency from these kind of questions. And they give me like really harsh feedback. And sometimes I'll get really, disappointed and sad at myself. But then I'm like, how cool is it that they are strong enough to tell their dad, who's 5'10", works out, like lifts 300 pounds at a bench press, and it can be pretty intimidating. And my resting face is not friendly. And they can tell me like where I suck on a regular basis. Like, they are being mentally prepared to stand up to characters that kind of obstruct their goals.
Yeah, I love this. That is fantastic feedback. I think I like this idea of the performance evaluation and also giving your kid the out to say like, you suck at this and let me tell you why. And then your growth, you're having a growth mindset around this feedback, even if maybe it's not presented in the most kind way. I mean, we are also learning. So do you ever give your kids feedback on things like that? Do you ever do performance evaluations per se for your children?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. All the time. I do recognize. So two of my kids do travel sports, and anyone listening who has kids in travel sports know they get way too much feedback. Parents get way too frenetic. And sometimes it's kind of like when you're driving on the road and someone has so much rage and they're so pissed off and they're just yelling and screaming that you like become very calm. You just start, you're just so chill. You're like in a sensory deprivation check, just floating in 2,000 pounds of salts, just Epsom salts, just because like you've taken all the angst from me. And so when I'm in these environments with my kids in sports, for example, I don't do necessarily a performance evaluation. I really ask them, I describe very precisely things that I think they're amazing at. And sometimes my kids will say like, you're too positive all the time. I'm like, no. Everything's subjective. Like, when have I ever described something very clearly and precisely? What you did on the soccer field, on the volleyball court, it's you. What I'm not saying is like, oh my God, you're on your way to a college scholarship, which is what like a lot of parents say, or my God, like you should have been the MVP, not that person on the team. Like, I don't care. I just don't want my kid to be the bottom two people, which everyone's like, oh man, they're going onto the field. Like, I can't believe the coach let him go. You just don't want your kid to be one of those two. My apologies to parents who have those kids, because that's your own set of problems. So my feedback for them is usually it's like, hey, if you get to go into your next game, like right now, like what would you want to do differently? And then so it's really like this more generative way of giving feedback. Or, my 17-year-old's now dating. And so I'm not that dad that is trying to say, oh, like with my biceps and guns, like, nobody's going to be dating my daughter. I'm like, no. This is part of becoming like a woman. Like, it's fine. I don't want to hear about it, the details, but like, it's fine. And so when they have a date and they come back and they seem like, like discombobulated about it, I'll just ask them like, hey, like what happened? And then was there any point like that you wish you said or did something differently, like when you were there? And then it's just getting them in the mindset of doing these retrospective reviews of what just happened, not to ruminate about what happened, so that you're mentally prepared better for the next situation.
Yeah, I like that. It's kind of, they're solving their own problem, really. You're just helping them find the path. And that is, I mean, ultimately our job as parents is to raise them to be able to survive as adults without us. And so that's a great way to make that happen.
Yeah. And then I can't resist this to say for any father that's listening is I feel really strongly is that the idea that you're not going to let your sons date, but not let your girls date when they're younger is you're just making them ill prepared for when they go off to college or to move to someplace else when you're not there. And to me, I want them to make all the mistakes and errors and have all the weird, awkward, ambiguous situations when I'm at least readily available physically, where I can kind of jump in and be like, oh man, like I'm so sorry that happened to you. Like, first of all, do you want advice or just want to tell me what happened? And then just let them and do these retrospectives of like, okay, like, well, what can we do better next time for that situation? And it's exactly what I wish I had when I was a kid. Like no one knew anything about me. Like, am I dating? Well, I was just guessing.
Yeah, I think, we have to experience things to like make our own decision. And I like the idea of thinking back, like what's something that you learned or can grow from or whatever that they're taking away versus you being like, oh, don't date him or don't date her, or she's like this or he's like that. Because the reality is that our kids do have to learn these things and make a decision for themselves so that they're living their own lives instead of living a life for us.
Yeah. And this gets to, one of the three psychological needs that every human has, especially our kids do, is the need for mastery. And that is the sense that they could walk around their environment and know that they can actually modify things and change things. And if you're always a totalitarian figure that's controlling what they do in the gym, what sports they play, what clubs they do, what college. No. You're gonna go to an Ivy League school just like your mom and dad. When you're doing that, you might feel like you're in control. You are in control. But what you're doing is you're depriving them of satisfying a psychological need. They're becoming mentally weaker and they're experiencing less well-being. And so is control really the thing that you want, or are you afraid that you don't have control? And that's what's motivating, all this kind of action on your behalf.
Yeah, I would like to say that I do not have control over any of my children, really. I mean, I've like recognized, like they're acting appropriately, right, in society and being good humans. But I think people will be like upset about not being able to control their kids. And I'm like, when have we really had control over them? I mean, we can punish them or consequence them or, but really, if my 2-year-old wants to take off his diaper, I'm going to try to distract him. I'm going to try to do other things, right? Like I'm going to be like, let's go play this. Let's go do that instead of fighting him over the diaper and hope that it stays on. But sometimes it doesn't. And then it's like, oh, okay, this is where we're at, right? Like I ultimately don't have control over this, but like maybe we're going to go outside so that you're not peeing all over the house, right? Like I think this. Yeah, go
No,
ahead.
no, I was gonna say, I'm so curious now, like what parenting practice or belief you have do you think that's somewhat controversial or non-normative that you have? Just listening to that story.
Oh, you mean in that situation or just
No,
like in
just
general?
just in
Yeah.
general.
Um, I mean, I think, gosh, that's I think I have a lot of things that are probably non-normative or maybe just like not what other families are doing even now. But I think I'm big into letting my kids make choices and also experiencing consequence. And this is something in my own home that is hard for my husband to accept because he has a very anxious personality and I'm a little bit more free flowing. And I'll be like, I remember one time there was like this slide that you could put on your stairs and like the kids could go down it. And I was like, oh my gosh, we should totally get this. And he was like, what is wrong with you? Like that does not make any sense. And I'm like, it looks really fun. And he was like, yeah, and a broken arm. And I was like, yeah, but like, I don't know. My parents used to give me wax paper to go down this metal slide we had at a school down the street from us. I was like, fast is good. And he's like, fast is bad. No, don't do that. But I think our kids have to try stuff. And I think we can present parameters. But I mean, the reality is that, and this is definitely not a people may not like this thought. But we can tell our kids not to date, but they're going to date anyways. I mean, if that's what they're going to do, they're going to do it. And I know that because I did that. My parents said, you cannot date till you're 16. I was like newly 15. And I was like, I like this guy. I'm going to date. And they're like, are you dating? I'm like, no, he's my friend. Right. So
Yeah.
I did it anyways. And so I think it's about being a companion on this journey, right? Like to go with them. And there are things that our kids are doing that, I mean, sometimes I'm like, no, don't do that. Right. Like I'm certainly guilty of that. Or like, I don't want you to do that. Or please don't do that now or whatever. But for the most part, I'm like, hey, why is that? What's going on here? Like, help me to understand where you're at. Like you're really wanting to do this. Why is dating so important? I don't have anybody dating yet in my house, but I think that's the thing. But I do that. I get the opportunity to practice those skills at work. And so because I'm not the parent. And so then it helps me to be able to do that at home too, of like having a non-judgmental approach. But I think it's hard for parents not to come with their preconceived notions of like what's right or wrong.
Yeah. And I think there is a big cultural force for us. Like we should be doing more, like constantly being on top of them, going to their parties with them, throwing extravagant parties ourselves. If they want to go for a bike ride, we go bike ride with them. You don't walk,
Mm-hmm.
6 blocks from the house without any adult supervision because you could be, human trafficking exists. I mean, there are all these things that the
Mm-hmm.
culture has pulled us to be really risk averse. So,
Yeah.
and I think it takes these conversations, listening to these kind of podcasts to actually remind you of like, okay, like I can snap out of this and actually be a positive deviant in a culture that's pushing for too far in one direction.
Yeah. Is there anything that you feel like you are off the norm for in terms of parenting?
Tons of things.
Yes. I mean, I'm in the same camp. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like for example, I'll contrast myself with my other next door neighbor who he won't let his kids watch movies until they reach the actual Motion Picture Association number. So
Mm-hmm.
like he's a 12-year-old and they can't watch a PG-13 movie until they're 13.
Mm-hmm.
I'm of the belief that your kids they shouldn't be exposed to gratuitous violence or sex, but everything is acceptable fodder if an adult's going to be present and you're going to be able to converse about what happened and you let them hold the blanket over their eyes. Now you don't force them to watch the show. It's the other way around. If they say like, hey, like there's Deadpool. Deadpool was the first R-rated movie by one of my 17-year-old twins. We were taxiing on a runway. It was past 3 hours, one of those ones where we got $150 from United. And that was the movie that was showing. And she's like, can I see it? It's R-rated. And I'm like, this is a perfect first R-rated movie. And I was sitting right next to her. And, half the jokes, not half the jokes, like 80% of the inappropriate humor, like went over her head. Found it hilarious. And then there were some jokes that I kind of thought that she would find funny that I just described like what these like innuendos were, and other ones I'm like, I do not want her like to understand any of that. But I really believe there's like in scaffolding, where you want them to try for something a little bit beyond their developmental level and know that they have a safe, secure base that's going with them. And so they're experimenting. And many times my kids are like, you know what? This is too scary. I don't want to watch it. I'm like, done, off. We're watching Modern Family. Like, it's over.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And then other times, like, they want to go to a haunted house. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, this one's like, there's no kids here. They're like, just let me try. I'm like, okay. Like, if you don't listen, anytime you want to, they have escape hatches. We can kind of like, just jump out of there. And then sometimes I have to pay people like $20 of saying, they say, it's 16 and older. I'm like, all right, listen, here's $20. My kid's 11. They want to do this. I promise you, like, I will sign a paper, a waiver saying we won't sue you. That happens there. And I think this is like why my kids actually are pretty emotionally mature, is because they've always asked, and I've usually let them like explore things that are a little bit beyond them. And so, and the other part of that, the side effect benefit is there aren't that many taboos where they have to rebel against me, because they're pretty much could say, as long as they're like you said, they're good people outside in the world, and they are, then I don't care if they use like George Carlin's like bad words in the household. And there's plenty of research to show that when you use profanity, when you hurt yourself, you actually like experience less pain and you actually function much better. So if they use it strategically in athletics, if not at another kid, but like just start cursing because they care, it's great. Like, it's like, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. So last question for you. Is there a book that you love that is good guidance for parenting? I know one is,
That's the hardest question.
Yeah. Or several, or yeah. Where are you at with this?
Yeah. I mean, I hate to sound like, you can see behind me, I love books. I have never been that impressed with too many parenting books. Here's why. And actually, I'm waiting till my kids get a little bit older, and then I plan to writing. I'm not saying that my book's going to be better than all the other books that are out there. I don't think many of these books have the right tone of leniency and playfulness. It's like they take it like too seriously. Like there's some like part of having kids is like the levity. Like they remind us to be more playful. Like a bunch of kids go on the playground, and all of a sudden, 7 minutes later, they have 3 new friends. And like adults, we should be jealous of kids are awesome at this. And like, I've never read a book that really hit me hard of like, this has captured parenting in the real ambiguous, annoying world that we live in. So yeah, I actually don't have, I can recommend all sorts of other books in every other topic, but parenting, yeah, Bryce, like from talking to you, I feel like I would read a book by you in a split second, but I'm actually haven't really been impressed with many parenting books.
What's funny about that is I feel the same. And so like in my practice, I do not recommend parenting books normally, or I'll be like, read chapter 5. Right. Like, it's like, there's just sections of it. And so, and also I know that most parents are not going to read a parenting book, right? Like that's not the thing they're going to do. I mean, some do, right? And I love that. But for the majority of life, it's so chaotic that like when you're in the chaos, stopping to read a book about what you're supposed to be doing is like a lot. And so getting some like direct advice is probably easier and more personal to your experience. But yeah, I feel the same. I haven't seen that book. And so I'm always looking for it. You can't see my shelf, but I have a huge shelf of books behind me, and these are only the ones that have made it. Yeah. The rest of them I like donate. So I'm so sorry to whoever goes to Goodwill or Savers or whatever it is. All the ones I don't love are there. But yes. So, well, thank you so much, Todd, for your time. This has been a lovely conversation. I have so appreciated your thoughts and feelings on things, and you've taught me some stuff. So I appreciate it.
Oh, this is so much fun. I can't wait to broadcast this everywhere.
Thanks again, Todd. That was a fantastic conversation. I'm so glad that we were able to have this today and share it with my audience. So thanks again for coming, and thank you for being here to grow your parenting toolbox. If you like what we're doing, please like and subscribe, rate us, follow us on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, and also send us emails with topic requests to accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Have a fantastic day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.